Hello and welcome to Creditversio's Q&A Wednesday live for January 19th. I am your host, David Mahalik, and today is a special episode because we're going to be discussing a really hot topic in the credit repair space right now that claims to be a revolutionary new way of disputing and deleting accounts on your credit report. I'm sure you guys are going to know what I'm talking about. We get questions about this pretty frequently. And this method is called Metro 2 compliance challenges, also called Metro 2 compliance disputes. Now, what I'm going to do before we get started is I want to read to you the four top selling points that I've taken directly from the websites that explain what Metro 2 compliance disputes are. So I'm not going to name the websites. I'm not going to do that. It's not important. You can do a Google search and everything's going to be right there. You're not going to have a problem finding it. So let me read off the four what I think are the most impressive claims, and then we're going to talk about them. So the first one is, there is a difference between a traditional credit dispute and a Metro 2 compliance dispute through eOscar. We'll get to eOscar in a second. Okay. Number two, Metro 2 compliance disputes go past the visible information on your credit report. That's fascinating. And again, this is coming right from the websites that present this Metro 2 compliance formula. Okay, next one, number three, Metro 2 compliance disputes use the credit bureau's own hidden language to challenge the reporting of negative accounts. And number four, last one here, I think this one is the most impressive claim. Metro 2 compliance disputes trigger automated investigations in the credit bureau's eOscar system using the bureau's computers to do all the work for you. That sounds very, very high tech, very interesting. Something going on behind the scenes that's all digital. So all of that really sounds incredible. But the question is any of this stuff true? So let's find out. Now, if you want to know what happens when the credit bureaus receive dispute letters, best person to ask is someone who worked in the credit bureaus in the department that handles dispute resolution. So much of this takes place, all these claims and true or not true, exist in the credit repair space without input from real credit experts. So today I have with me two industry experts, both who've worked in dispute resolution at a credit bureau. So let's welcome my guests. We have with me John Ulzheimer, formerly with Equifax, and Steve Reger, formerly with TransUnion. All right, so today I brought in the heavies because we got to talk about this subject. So when there are sensational claims, things that I don't even recognize, and I've been doing this for almost a decade now. Hey, I don't know. I have a pretty good idea what goes on in the credit bureaus, but I'm not an expert. So welcome, gentlemen. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for having me, David. I always enjoy my time with you.
So this week, what I want to do is let's break this down. I want to break down the four core claims from Metro 2, legitimate or not legitimate. Let's break it down. Let's discuss it. Let's diagnose it. And but the first thing I want to do, guys, is let's take about maybe a minute and give us your bio. What's your background? I already told the viewers that you come from TransUnion, Steve, John, Equifax. But if you can take just a second and talk about what you did there, maybe about 60 seconds, maybe a little bit more than that. And Steve, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you. I was at TransUnion from 1988 to 2015, so 27 years. And when I left there, I ran the operations center in Fullerton, California. TransUnion had two dispute or operations centers stateside, one in Crumlin, Pennsylvania, that still exists, and then the other was in Fullerton, California. They shut that down, and I didn't relocate, and that's why I left TransUnion. I also ran the litigation support team there, which managed all of the inbound litigation against TransUnion, federal and state lawsuits. And I also did direct-to-consumer sales, and I ran the fraud victim assistance department. So I had my hand in all of the dispute processes, the legal processes, and whatnot, managing over 200 people at one point.
And I think at one point you said handling about 10 or was it 15,000 disputes a day?
Yeah, we would get about 10,000 inbound disputes and phone calls a day in the Fullerton Center. So with
Okay,
about 2/3 phone, about 1/3 by mail.
got it. Okay, great. John, a little background on you, sir.
So, November marked my 30th year in the credit industry. I've spent time at Equifax, FICO, and a variety of other companies kind of concurrently that have something to do with consumer credit. I guess as it pertains to the topic that we're going to talk about tonight, David. Um, my first job out of college was processing consumer disputes, and so I was kind of the tip of the sword in that respect. And back in that period of time, disputes were almost entirely submitted either on the telephone or in letter form. So similar to how a credit repair company submits a dispute today in letter form. I coded in Metro, so I actually could build a credit report from scratch using Metro and modify the information on a credit report in Metro. And obviously, Metro is the predecessor to Metro 2, which is the standardized language. So my background is all dispute resolution with the Bureau. And then since then, it's been credit scoring, and kind of similar to Steve, I've had a fair amount of my time was spent in the litigation world, but as an expert witness in many scenarios on behalf of the consumer credit reporting agencies and the companies that furnish information to them.
Excellent. Okay, so no question, we got two guys here that have had their hands in dispute resolution directly at a bureau level for a long, long time, understand Metro 2, and let's get into it. In fact, talking about Metro 2, so there's two components to this presentation, this claim from the Metro 2 compliant disputes is we're talking about eOscar and we're talking about Metro 2. So why don't we answer that for people who are viewing, who I'm sure probably have a general idea of at least have heard of Metro 2, may or may not know what eOscar is. So why don't we start with that? Let's answer these two questions first. What is Metro 2? And John, since we left off with you talking about the Metro, why don't I have you start there?
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, we can divide and conquer. I can take one, and Steve can take one. So Metro 2 is, not to make it too complicated, Metro 2 is a language. It is a standardized language used in the credit industry that facilitates the reporting of information from the 11,000 some odd companies that furnish information to the credit bureaus on a monthly basis. So think of it kind of as a common delimited series of alphanumeric characters. And these are essentially the DNA or the building blocks of what goes into a consumer's credit report. And so Metro 2 flows two directions. Number one, it is furnished to the credit reporting agencies by banks, credit unions, debt collectors, servicers, and whatnot. And then when the credit reporting agencies send information back to furnishers, when they pull a credit report for the purposes of, say, for example, underwriting, they're sending the information back to them in the same Metro 2 format. And so the goal of Metro 2, which has been wildly successful, has been to create this standardized method for all these companies to report information to the credit bureaus and also take possession of information during the process of credit inquiries.
Excellent. Steve, anything to add to that, or?
I'll just say Metro 2 was created by what's now the Consumer Data Industry Association. At the time, it was Associated Credit Bureaus, and they oversee that that language and its ongoing
Got
publishing.
it. Okay. All right. Good understanding of what Metro 2 is. Let's talk about eOscar. eOscar, even when I get posts and questions, there seems to be a lot of confusion about what eOscar is. And Steve, why don't we start with you?
eOscar is a system that was designed by the credit bureaus and the data furnishers, as a way to communicate and facilitate the reinvestigation of information on a credit report. So it's kind of it's sort of like an email box, an exchange where if somebody were to dispute a trade line on a credit report at TransUnion, that dispute would then get codified and then downloaded into a mailbox, if you will, that then the furnisher that originally furnished that underlying information would then view. They would then compare that dispute information with what they have in their systems and then provide a response back to the credit bureaus who would then view it. So it's just a way for them to exchange information on disputes. And where eOscar probably sometimes gets a bad rap is that in order for it to really function in the way that it is, disputes oftentimes have to be, condensed or codified. And sometimes things get lost in that codification or in translation, as they say.
Got it. So the dispute comes in, it's got to be in some way simplified.
Yeah, that's right. Now it's kind of evolved over time. Now they allow for maybe attached images and more freeform sort of comments and stuff to go with it. But certainly in the early days, it's like a dispute would get translated into like a two-digit, two-letter code, like A2 or D2 or something like that, and that's all it was.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That hasn't changed. There's 34 of them now.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically taking the consumer's communication and it homogenizes it into a code. And the code represents the consumer's dispute, and it acts to facilitate. Actually, it guides or limits the furnisher's investigative process. In other words, if you dispute the validity of the balance, you wouldn't investigate late payments. If you say the account isn't yours, you wouldn't investigate the balance. And so the dispute codes help to kind of act as the point guard, if you will, for the dispute analyst on the furnisher side. And Steve, the way that eOscar functions now is that those attachments, there is actually a systemic requirement to open the attachments in order for the dispute analyst to be able to respond to the ACDV, for example, if it's an ACDV or an indirect dispute. It has evolved from no attachments to attachments, and now these attachments must be opened, or the furnisher can't even respond to them.
Yeah, one of the challenges, with the credit bureaus with attachments is like if you were to send to TransUnion a 30-page dispute which had 30 documents, and one of those documents related to Bank of America, but 29 to other parts of your dispute, the credit, at least at TransUnion, they were unable to separate that one page. So when they did the attachment, they had attached all 30 pages, and then Bank of America had to sort through which one related to their dispute.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Great. So next question, and then we're going to get into the 4 highlights of the Metro 2 compliance disputes, is walk us through real quickly what happens when a letter. But we're just talking about letter disputes. We'll leave phone disputes and online disputes for another time. But letter disputes, they're received at the bureaus. What happens next? What's physically going on with that paper dispute? And then, John, if you can, we'll have you start with that one.
All right. So here's the chronology of it. So consumer buys a letter template online or writes a free-form letter themselves and drops it in the U.S. mail system, and a day or two later it hits a mailbox somewhere, and someone from the credit bureau systems take possession of it. So the letter identifies the consumer, hopefully. It identifies the item on the consumer's credit report with which they disagree, hopefully. And the letter identifies what about the item with which they disagree. So, example, John Ulzheimer, 123 Main Street, 123456789 is my social. I'm disputing this Bank of America account. The balance is wrong. So that's a garden variety dispute. So that particular communication would be homogenized into a form. That form is called an ACDV, or an Automated Consumer Dispute Verification Form. And the dispute code that Steve was just talking about a moment ago, that there is in fact a dispute code for balance is wrong, and that dispute code would be appended to that particular dispute form, and then would be magically whisked across the internet in the system called eOscar, which is basically like a communication protocol. And then the next morning, the dispute analysts from the bank can log into their eOscar account. They can see that they have a pending dispute form. They can open it up, they can read it, they can look at attachments, and they can perform their investigation based on the information that is disputed. Once they have completed their investigation, they will essentially respond back to the same credit bureau on the same form, answering the question regarding the disputed information, in this case, the balance. So they'll either change the balance to some other balance, they'll verify it as accurate. If they have no record of the consumer whatsoever, then the item has to be removed because it's an unverifiable trade line. They whisk the form back to the credit bureau, and the credit bureau, at that point, the dispute form becomes almost like a work order. And the work order will guide the credit bureau as to what they need to do to the trade line. So the credit bureaus can actually go in now and modify the balance, or leave the balance as is, or delete the trade line if the item is unverifiable. And then, of course, the credit bureaus, as is their obligation, they have to send the consumer a summary of the results of the investigation. Normally, this is something that's done through the U.S. mail system. That entire process that I just explained, even though the credit bureaus have between 30 and 45 days, according to the Credit Bureaus Trade Association, that entire process takes between 10 and 14 days, give or take.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So, Steve, how much of this is manual? So when a dispute letter comes in, let's just say it's 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, whatever it is, it gets scanned. How much of this is being reviewed by a human being? Is anything being touched by human hands?
Well, if at TransUnion, if it's a letter that's being mailed in, 100% of it is touched by a human, right? None of it is automated. There are components of the process that you could say are automated, but somebody is physically, maybe with the aid of a machine, opening the letter. That letter is probably being scanned and imaged, but then somebody is still looking at that letter to decide where it should go. They've got to decide, is this a disclosure request? Is it a mixed file dispute? Is it a fraud dispute? Is it just a standardized dispute? Does this person have any sort of special history, like litigation or a government complaint or something like that, right? And depending on all that, it's got to get sorted into different areas. Now that once it's sorted, then it's queued up in an automated fashion. And then depending on what type of dispute, you may be in India, you might be in Pennsylvania, you might be somewhere else, and you would then see an image of that letter, but you're still manually looking at it with your eyes, and you're still reading through it, encoding into the systems, into what TransUnion called their consumer relations system, the context of that dispute, while looking at the actual credit report side by side.
Got it. Okay. So why don't we do this, guys? What's that?
100% manual.
Got it. Okay. So let's take a look. What I want to show you two now, I know you've seen them before, but let's take a look at what a supposed Metro 2 compliance dispute looks like. It doesn't look like anything that we've typically seen. Let me put it on the screen here. Now at the top, you'll see that there's some kind of a ledger, a key, question mark equals data points is questionable. Then there's got I, then M, U. And then what's happening is, let me see if I can just scroll down. Now here's an account. This is a real account, by the way. I had a friend of mine who has done many Metro 2 disputes, and this is what he sent me. So I, of course, redacted the information that is private, but we're looking at what a dispute appears when it is sent in letter format. So here's Toyota Motor Credit. I'm not sure if you can see up here. But if we look at a breakdown of the fields of the account, we've got a bunch of, let me see if I can zoom that in a little bit. We've got a bunch of U's and I's and, what else have we got here? Mostly U's and I's. And then at the very bottom, let me see if I can, we have the dispute down here. Let me see if I can read it. It's kind of hard with all of our names there. So what I'm seeing is it's not like, hey, this is my account, I disagree with it. It's this code that is what we're going to get into next. Can you guys see both of this?
A little bit. It's kind of small, but I think I can make it out.
Okay. Let me just do what I can to zoom in a little bit, because once you've seen this part right here, I think you've seen it all. So you can see the different fields: high balance, last verified, date of last activity, the normal fields that we're all going to see on a credit report. And then next to it we have in red I's and U's, which represent something in this ledger above here. Like U is data point, is elsewise unproven. It's interesting language. As reported, undocumented claims cannot be assumed valid nor compliantly reported. Okay, yeah. All right, so you guys got a pretty good idea what we're talking about here?
Yeah. I'm having a hard time not laughing. I'm having a hard time not laughing, but yes. I have a clear picture of what we're dealing with here.
Okay, so all All right, so let's do this. So really, what I want to do is let's break down what appear to be the four big highlights, the four claims of a Metro 2 dispute, and that's what they look like. There's a larger part in the beginning that's just a bunch of legalese, and we can get into that in a second. But the number one is what I mentioned earlier in the beginning is this: there is a difference between a traditional credit dispute and a Metro 2 compliance dispute through eOscar. So the question is, when bureaus receive a dispute that looks like this with all the red coding, is there a difference in how they're processed? Is something magical going on when these things are scanned and those little codes are there? Let's start with Steve.
No, absolutely not, right? I mean, to me, it's all a bunch of noise. That, in fact, it makes it very difficult for the credit bureau to discern what that dispute is, and it probably does more harm than it does in any good there. So, a normal person when they submit a dispute is going to say account number X is not my account, or account X is never been late. They're going to give some sort of specific stuff. Anytime you use terms like unproven or you can't make assumptions and stuff like that, what does that really mean? And the credit bureaus are just trying to really get down to the crux of what the dispute is so they can then get that into eOscar. They can then get that onto the data furnisher. When you create noise like this, oftentimes you're just going to respond back with, I can't understand your dispute. And then you just get a letter in response.
Right. John, I know you had another take on this too about, this kind of screams of credit repair, among other things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not just that. It's so remember we talked about how there's these 34 dispute codes, and your letter is going to fall within one or two of those dispute codes. So that letter with all the U's and the I's and whatnot is so non-specific that the credit bureaus actually have a "we don't know what your dispute is" code, and it's the 112 dispute code. And I'm going to read it to you. Consumer states inaccurate information. Provider confirm complete ID and verify all account information. That is a euphemism for we have no idea what you're disputing, so we're just going to ask the furnisher to verify everything. So they're going to send off an ACDV with dispute code 112. They're going to attach that letter that you just whipped up on the screen, and they're going to ship it off to whatever, I guess it was Toyota Motor in that example. They'd send it off to Toyota Motor, and Toyota Motor would verify all the identification to make sure that it really is the correct person's loan. And then they would verify the balances and the various dates and the payment history and account statuses and the various code narratives that go along with the trade line. And then they would send it back to the credit bureaus in a week or 2 weeks. And then the credit bureaus would update the trade line accordingly and then send the results to the consumer. So I guess all the noise on the front end, the way that eOscar is designed, it's designed to take all the noise and funnel it down into one very simple code. And then at that point going forward, it's the same garden variety ACDV exchange process that occurs millions of times every single year.
The next one is, and I think we're going to come back to that 112 we were talking about, because that'll be a question that we wrap up with. So the next is Metro 2 compliance disputes go past the visible information on the credit report. Now, does Metro 2 dispute, how does a dispute go past what we see on a credit report?
Well, the credit bureaus have a lot of information about you that doesn't show up on a credit report, and at both the trade line level and then maybe at the identifying level and stuff like that. But if it's data that they sell to a user, like a subscriber, like a bank, they have to disclose it to you. And so that's the only stuff that matters, is what's being published to the data furnishers. And so there's no invisible stuff that is somehow going to tackle behind the scenes. And because if it's not present on the credit report, there's nothing to reinvestigate.
Got it. So that's sort of what I was looking for, is if there's something that we can't see, then how are we seeing it? How is the dispute? What's the dispute based off of? And I think we've established that these codes don't really do anything.
The process is not different. I mean, the dispute letter may look different. I mean, you can take that dispute letter and modify it 1,000 times, but it doesn't change what happens when the credit bureau gets that letter. When the credit bureau gets that letter, they're going to pull the consumer's data. I mean, they're going to pull up the consumer's identifier, essentially their credit report. They're essentially going to find the trade line that is in dispute, and then they're going to lodge the dispute per the communication from the consumer. And if that communication is confusing or unclear, they're just going to choose the 112 dispute code because it's the catch-all. They're going to slap it onto an ACDV and they're going to ship it off to the furnisher. So again, there's no magical dungeon somewhere that's being invaded by any particular dispute letter being sent by a consumer. So I don't understand what this phrase is suggesting actually has. And maybe if someone can explain to me what they think that actually means, that'd be fine, and we could discuss it. But right now, I think we're trying to assume what that means. And trust, David, I've asked these same questions as well, and I'm not really getting good answers, which is problematic, because then we have a credibility issue if people can't give clear and concise answers to really simple questions like, well, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say things like triggers a different blah blah blah? What does that mean? So and so said this, and so and there's another thing that I think is important to point out is we keep throwing out the word compliance repeatedly, as if we're kind of giving Metro 2 compliance this era or aura of life, like this thing actually exists. I can promise you this: Metro 2 is not the law. There is no statute, federal or state, called Metro 2. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, which is in fact a statute, does not mention Metro 2. There is no mention of Metro 2 anywhere in the 90-some-odd pages of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So this suggestion that you have to be compliant with Metro 2 is simply not true. You can adhere to the Metro 2 guidelines and standards, but they are just suggestions. And the CDIA's manual make that very clear, that ultimately it's up to the furnisher to decide how they want to report information to their credit reporting agencies, because they're the ones who are liable for reporting stuff wrong. And of course, Metro 2 is a good way to help not report something wrong. So I think that's also something important to point out, is that you can accuse somebody of not being compliant with the Fair Credit Reporting Act and sue them because of that. But if you're going to accuse somebody of not being compliant with Metro 2, you're going to have a devil of a time following a lawsuit for that, because there is no requirement to be compliant with Metro 2, because it is not the law. And that's something that plaintiffs experts love to point out, because I always hide behind Metro 2 as, hey, look, they're following the industry standards. And then the plaintiffs guys are like, well, but Metro 2 isn't the law. Accuracy is the overriding standard, not Metro 2. And so I'm like, we can't have it both ways, right? I mean, so that's another thing I think it's important to point out, is that let's not give false life to something that doesn't actually exist. This issue of Metro 2 compliance, that there really is no such thing as that.
Yeah, that's a huge thing to really talk about, because the crux of all of this is, I mean, the foundation of everything that we're talking about is that there is this overreaching Metro 2 compliance that has to be adhered to. Otherwise, things have to be deleted from the credit report.
That's factually inaccurate. There's no standard in the Fair Credit Reporting Act that if something is inaccurate, it has to be removed from the credit report. If the furnisher corrects it, then it can remain on the credit report. So I think we need to be very, very clear with what is an obligation and what is not an obligation. Perfect credit reporting is not the standard in the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Having procedures to ensure maximum possible accuracy is the standard, and correcting something that is incorrect is frankly how the system is supposed to work if a consumer lodges a dispute. And if something is accurate, then not only can the credit bureaus keep it on a consumer's credit report, but the furnisher can keep reporting it every single month if they choose to do so.
Okay. Excellent. So this next question is, so Metro 2, the next statement or claim is Metro 2 compliance disputes use the credit bureau's own hidden language to challenge the reporting of negative accounts. Okay, so let's not cover that one, because I think that we already hit that one with the hidden language. So let's get to the fourth one, because I know that we've got about maybe 8 or 9 minutes left before we have to call this quits. And I really want to finish up with this one, because this is the one that I think, people in the credit repair space, mom and pop shops, small companies who are excited about maybe the possibility of being able to to position themselves as having this and selling this to their clients. This is the big one, and this is the one that I read and like, wow, this is, if this were even slightly true, it'd be very interesting. So the last one is Metro 2 triggers automated investigations in the credit bureau's eOscar system using the bureau's computers to do all the work for you. Now, this is the one that sounds like something automated beyond what human beings are doing is happening in the background, like there's an AI or something with the letters. The way that it's been explained to me, John and Steve, from me asking questions about what is this kind of a dispute, is the dispute letter goes in, the software, the OCR reads these codes, and then magic happens, and then it's absent of intervention with people. So, Steve, let's start with you on that one.
There's no hidden language. Again, there's no automation with this. The typical person that's processing a dispute probably is going to spend 5, 6, maybe 7 minutes reading through the letter, doing all the things they need to do to process it and get it onto the data furnisher through eOscar. Most people that are doing these reinvestigations have no idea even what Metro is, or they probably have heard of it, but they couldn't really speak to it any more than it's a name. It's just. I find it really shocking. And the other thing that really stands out to me is that if somebody were to mail one of those letters into the credit bureaus, and then maybe the credit bureaus didn't, at least to the consumer standard, perform proper reinvestigation, and they take it to court, I mean, no jury or judge is going to look at this and even be able to figure out what it means, right? This does absolutely nothing to help a case, right? All a judge and jury wants to see is that you've clearly articulated a specific dispute, and that then the credit bureau failed to fulfill its obligation to properly reinvestigate that. But you can't understand these, and so I don't know how you could even say what the credit bureau is supposed to do.
So let's pause real quick. I want to take this one question from Mike. Mike always asks great questions. He's a regular. And then I want to go down to our very last question. We can finish with that. So Mike so can't Metro 2 be held liable for false information? I like this question because I know where it's going. And Steve, since you're on a roll here, maybe you can speak to this one.
Who's Metro 2? All Metro 2 is some sort of formatting guide. I mean, there's no Metro 2 to sue.
You're in English because you don't like English. Metro 2 is a computer language. It's not an entity. There's no person. You can't. Where are you going to deliver the lawsuit paperwork? Metro 2 is it's a language.
Got it. Yep. Yeah. So that's and Mike always asks great questions, and that's one that again it's a good question because if we're talking about something that's so mysterious like Metro 2, it has this air of magic about it. It's almost ethereal. Like we'll get questions like this, like, Metro 2 is responsible for this because there's not really any really clear information on what this is actually doing. This is why I have you guys on.
David, do me a favor. Read back that last one that you read about triggers and automated blah, blah, blah. Read that. No, not Mike's question. Read that.
Oh, gotcha.
And read it slowly because I'll point a couple of things out as you're reading it.
Okay. So the last one is Metro 2 compliant disputes triggers automated investigations in the credit bureau's eOscar system.
Okay, so stop there. Stop there. All disputes trigger automated investigations through eOscar. This happens, according to the CFPB, 8 million times per year. So when you send a letter, whether the letter is written in crayon or is a sophisticated letter written by a lawyer, once the credit bureau gets it, it's homogenized into this dispute code onto an ACDV, and it is sent in an automated fashion by eOscar to the furnisher. So what the claim is not anything novel or unique or special to any particular type of dispute. That's what happens every single time someone files a dispute, regardless of what kind of dispute it is. Okay, so continue with the rest of the claim.
Okay, and investigates in the credit bureau's e-Oscar system using the Bureau's computers to do all the work.
Okay, well, the credit bureau's computers do in fact do all the work. They take the letter from the consumer, they do the work, like what Steve was talking about reviewing the letter, homogenizing it into the dispute code, appending it to the ACDV, sending it to the furnisher, and then at that point, the credit bureau they stop. They don't do anything else. They wait for the response from the furnisher, and then the furnisher performs their investigation, sends it back to the credit bureau, and then again, the credit bureaus do work and either correct an item, delete an item, verify an item, and then send an update to the consumer. But again, that's not anything novel or unusual. That happens every single time a consumer files a dispute. So again, that entire sentence that you read basically describes a garden variety dispute process by the Bureau, not something that occurs when some specific type of letter is sent to them. So I think that's important to point out that sentence is in fact accurate, but it's accurate if I were to send a dispute letter on a piece of cardboard. It doesn't really matter if it's some sort of special, novelty type of dispute letter.
So coming down to the end of this, the last question is, the claims are that these letters work. And I know, John, that we talked about a second ago, we would come back to the 112 dispute reason. Mm-hmm. If we have people saying, hey, you know what, I've used this, maybe I don't know anything else other than this kind of a dispute, but I'm using it and it's working. Steve, what would be your response to that?
I don't believe it. I don't know how any of this helps. I only see how it makes things worse and more complicated. So I don't believe it.
So let's say hypothetically that a credit repair company sent 100 letters to one of the credit bureaus. Some percentage of those letters are going to result in a deletion, a change, something, right? I mean, all letters have some degree of effectiveness simply because they're disputes. You can say the same thing about online disputes. You can say the same thing about verbal disputes if you're able to get someone from the credit bureau on the phone and just tell them what your dispute is. So, do these dispute letters work? I'm sure that there's some deletions that are caused by these letters because they would be caused by any letter, right? The letter written by me, the letter written by David for me, the letter written by Steve. It doesn't really matter. There's no this theory of this letter style being somehow more effective at a higher rate than some other letter style, or an online filing or a verbal filing. That's the reason it's called a theory, is because it's a theory. It's unproven. There's no data to support that these letters result in a deletion or a modification at a higher rate than something that's not that type of letter. But yes, there's no doubt in my mind that any letter, you could also say, David, that letters written by left-handed people are more effective than letters written by right-handed people. It doesn't have anything to do with the left-handed or the right-handed. It's just a fact that there is some level of effectiveness to every form of communication with the credit reporting agencies. Do I have to buy a specific letter to get that, or can I get that on my own, or by hiring a different credit repair? I mean, I don't know. These are all theories that haven't been proven.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, so guys,
go ahead. Let me add one thing. So the credit bureaus, they have what are called auto delete rules. So, for example, at TransUnion, there was a rule that anytime somebody disputed a collection account that was less than $250, you just automatically deleted it. You didn't even bother to reinvestigate it, right? So you can send in a letter like that, just as John was suggesting, and dispute that collection account for $249, and it would get deleted. But not because of what was on the letter, because of the rules behind the scenes. And so
that's right.
A lot of this stuff, it may seem like there's some sort of magic or secret sauce, but it's due to some other factor. And that's what John was saying, for sure.
Yeah, and one of the auto delete rules that has been in place for, I think, 14 years now, because of the White v. Experian class action lawsuit with respect to how bankruptcies are reported. And all three of the credit bureaus have long since programmed these automatic, is if they find a statutorily dischargeable debt that predates the filing of a bankruptcy, if the consumer disputes that to the credit bureau, the credit bureaus don't go to the furnisher and perform any sort of extended investigation. They'll automatically update it to show included in bankruptcy. So that's an example of what Steve was referring to, is these automatic rules that don't require any sort of involvement from the furnisher. But the impression that it leaves is that somehow this letter was more effective than some other letter, but in reality it wasn't. It was just, all you did was essentially start the ball rolling, and it kept rolling because it's a ball. And so I think people need to be very cognizant of that the credit bureaus could care less what kind of letters they're getting. All they want to do is identify the consumer, identify the item that's in dispute, identify the reason it's being disputed, attach the documents to the ACDB, and zip it off to the furnisher. And that's their obligation under the FCRA. There's no added level of obligation that they have because someone starts throwing around industry terms. And this isn't the first time this has happened, right? The 609 dispute, or the 611 dispute letter, the credit sweep dispute letter. These are, every once in a while, something interesting and novel pops up and is next, is supposed to be the next iteration of sliced bread. And we'll see. They all fall into one of three categories: scam, novelty, or a real thing. And so as time passes, we'll see where to categorize this new method of dispute.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I know we've all got to run. I appreciate you being here. Great answers. Love getting input from gentlemen who actually worked at the credit bureaus in the industry itself. And appreciate your answers today. And for everybody watching, if you have questions on this, please post them on Facebook and we'll get to them. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, David. Thank you, John.
Evening, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, Steve. Take care. Good to see both of you. Thank you.
See ya.
Likewise.